Welcome, listeners. Today we have a rather sad story.
They came up the mountain at dusk, headlights cutting through the Colorado snow like an invasion I had been preparing for since spring. My son, his wife, the two grandchildren I had not held in 13 years. He smiled and said, "Dad, we just want a real Christmas." But behind that smile was a $26 million plan, and behind my workshop walls were 8 cameras already recording every word. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this began. January. A gas station. A photograph I was never supposed to see. The morning of January 14th started the way most mornings start in Aspen, Colorado, when you are 74 years old and living alone on a mountain. Coffee before sunrise, temperature hovering at 11 degrees. The kind of cold that does not ask permission before it settles into your joints and reminds you of every old injury you have tried to forget. I drove the old Ford pickup down the mountain road to Aspen Gas and Bait to fill the tank and pick up a bag of rock salt for the driveway. Walt Brody owned the place. He had owned it for 31 years, and in 31 years he had not changed a single thing about it. Not the hand-painted sign out front. Not the coffee machine from 1989. Not his habit of talking to every customer who walked through the door like they had all the time in the world. "Hank," he said, not looking up from his phone. "You see this? I was filling my cup at the counter, watching the snow begin coming down again outside the window." "See what, Walt?" He turned the phone screen toward me. "My nephew sent me a link. Caught your son's company thing online. Says he does one every year. Take your kids to work day. Looks like a real operation your boy has built down in Denver." I looked at the screen. There was Mason, my grandson, 10 years old, with his father's jaw and, from what I could tell through the small screen, my own father's eyes. He was laughing in the photograph, both arms wrapped around a silver-haired man wearing one of those expensive branded fleece vests that tech companies hand out at corporate retreats. The caption underneath read "Mason showing Grandpa Richard around the office. Best part of Take Your Kids to Work Day. Grandpa Richard." I set my coffee cup down on the counter. Walt was still talking something about how fast kids grow, how Travis had done well for himself in the startup world. I heard the words the way you hear rain on a roof from inside a warm room. Present, but separated from you by something solid. 13 years. I had not seen Mason in 13 years. He had been born in the summer of 2013, and by the time he was old enough to run, his father had made certain I would not be there to see it happen. I paid for the rock salt and the coffee. I thanked Walt. I walked back out to the truck. The drive back up the mountain took 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire way, fixing my eyes on the numbers the way a man does when he does not trust himself to look at anything else. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself with noise. It does not arrive with anger or broken dishes. It settles in quietly, like a change in the air pressure before a storm total, and impossible to argue with. That was what I felt driving up through the snow that morning, watching the San Juan peaks disappear one by one into clouds the color of old pewter. 13 years of birthday packages sent. 13 Christmases of handmade gifts wrapped in the workshop and carried to the post office. 13 years of tracking numbers checked every morning, waiting to see if one of them had finally made it through. And in all that time, not a single phone call returned. Not one letter answered. Grandpa Richard. The words had a weight I could not set down. I pulled into the gravel clearing in front of the cabin and sat with the engine running. The workshop stood 40 yards off to the left, a long, low structure I had built myself from Douglas fir in 2008, the year Caroline and I moved to the mountain for good. The windows were dark. Snow was collecting on the roof the way it always did, in long, uneven rows that reminded me of the first winter we spent here, when she had stood at the kitchen window and told me the mountain looked like it was wearing a hat. She had been gone 6 years now, and sitting in that truck, I understood for the first time that the grief I had been carrying was not only for her, it was for Mason, for Lila, the granddaughter I had never once spoken to. For 13 winters of silence I had told myself was temporary. For every package I had sent into the dark, convinced that love, given consistently enough, would eventually find a way through. A man can be patient for a long time. He can wait and hope and tell himself the right thing is coming. But patience has a floor. And I had just seen a photograph of my grandson wrapping his arms around another man and calling him Grandpa. I cut the engine. I sat for a long time, watching the workshop windows go dark against the snow. Then I went inside to find out exactly how deep the betrayal went. The workshop smelled the way it always smelled: pine resin, machine oil, and the particular dry warmth of seasoned hardwood that has been stacked and restacked over many years. I had built this room with my own hands in 2008, and in the 16 years since, it had become the one place on the mountain where I understood exactly what I was doing. I switched on the overhead light and stood in the doorway for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Along the left wall ran the main workbench, 12 feet of solid maple. I had planed flat myself, fitted with 2 bench vices and a row of hand tools hung in precise order above it. Against the back wall stood the bandsaw, the lathe, the drill press. Along the right wall, floor-to-ceiling shelving held lumber sorted by species and grade: Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, cherry, walnut, maple. And underneath the workbench, pushed back against the baseboard in the far left corner, sat the box. It was a simple storage chest, nothing more: Carolina maple dovetail joints, wooden dowel handles on each end. I had built it in 2013, the same year Mason was born. I had intended it as a blanket chest. It had become something else. I pulled it out from under the bench and set it on the floor in front of me. Unlatched the lid. Wood remembers what people try to forget. Inside, stacked and wrapped the way I had originally packed them, lay 156 wooden toys, each one handmade, each one labeled with a small paper tag tied through a drilled hole with a length of cotton twine. Each tag bore a name, a date, and an occasion. And every single one carried, on its outermost wrapping, the same red ink stamp: Return to sender unclaimed. I knelt on the workshop floor and began lifting them out one by one. The first was a wooden locomotive, painted in red and black, with 6 wheels that turned freely on a steel axle. The tag read, Mason, 2nd birthday. November 2015. I had spent 11 evenings making that train. I remembered the night I finished it, sitting at this same bench with Caroline reading in the chair by the wood stove, the smell of fresh paint drying in the warm air. She had held it up and turned it slowly in her hands and said it was the finest small thing I had ever made. Return to sender unclaimed, stamp dated December 2nd, 2015. The next was a carved wooden doll, 8 inches tall, with articulated arms and a simple painted face. I had modeled the face loosely on a photograph of Lila as a baby, the only photograph I had managed to find. taken from a distant relative's social media page before I lost access to it. In the base of the doll, in letters small enough to require reading glasses, I had carved C.S. 2015, Carolyn Sullivan, my wife's initials, in the wood, so that something of her might reach the granddaughter she had never held. The tag read, Lila, 6th birthday, September 2015, return to sender unclaimed. I set it on the floor beside the locomotive and kept going. There was a maple music box from Christmas of 2017, the year Caroline died. I had started it in October, while she was still alive, working on it in the evenings after she had gone to sleep. She had known I was building something, but had not asked what. In the last week of November, 10 days before she passed, she had found me at the bench finishing the final sanding and had stood in the doorway in her robe and said, quietly, "Whoever that's for is very lucky." I had told her it was for both grandchildren. She had nodded and gone back to bed without another word. The music box played 8 bars of You Are My Sunshine when the lid was opened. Return to sender unclaimed, December 22nd, 2017. I sat down on the workshop floor among the toys and kept taking them out of the chest. Wooden puzzles, a carved bear with movable legs, a small rocking horse sized for a child of 4, a set of alphabet blocks with letters I had burned in freehand, building blocks in graduated sizes, a pull toy duck on a string, a slingshot I had made for Mason at age 8, the handle shaped to fit small hands, 14 items for Lila's birthdays alone, 16 for Mason's, 22 Christmas sets. The rest scattered across Easter mornings and school milestones I had read about secondhand, from old social media posts and the occasional mention passed along by people who still spoke to Travis. 156 pieces, 13 years, all of them here, none of them ever opened by the children they were made for. I sat on the floor of my workshop and did not move for a long time. A man who builds things for a living understands something about permanence that other men sometimes miss. The wood you shape with your hands will outlast you. It will outlast most of the things you say and most of the things you regret. What you make carries a record of the hours you put into it, and that record does not lie and cannot be revised. I had put 13 years of hours into this chest, and Travis had stamped them all with the same 2 words. Return to sender. I did not cry. I had told myself, driving up the mountain from Walt's gas station, that I would not cry. And I did not. Instead, I reached up to the tool rack above the bench and took down my set of bench chisels, 6 of them. Graduated in width, kept razor sharp, and I found the sharpening stone on the lower shelf and I began to work. Grief is for men who still believe in repair. By Saturday morning, I was done repairing. I was measuring. Bureaucracy can save a man's life if he asks the right questions early enough. I was at the Aspen post office when it opened at 8:30 that Saturday morning. Standing on the sidewalk in the cold, with my breath making small clouds in the air. Waiting for Dolores Crenshaw to unlock the front door. Dolores had worked that counter for 28 years. She was 61 years old, built like a woman who had spent 3 decades lifting things that were heavier than they looked. And she had a memory for package histories that bordered on the photographic. "Mr. Sullivan," she said when she saw me. She read something in my face that made her skip the small talk entirely. "Come on inside." I handed her a handwritten list across the counter. The list contained every address I had ever used to send packages to Travis's family in Denver and the surrounding suburbs over the past 13 years. 4 addresses total. The handwriting was steady. I had made sure of that. I need the official tracking records for every package I have ever sent to these addresses. I told her. Complete documentation. Every delivery attempt, every status stamp, every notation, as far back as your system holds. Dolores looked at the list for a moment. Then she looked at me. That's going to be a significant amount of records. Hank. I know. Give me 40 minutes. I sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall and waited. The post office smelled the way small-town government buildings always smell: old carpet, and the particular stillness of a room where the same work has been done in the same way for decades. 2 other customers came and went. I did not move. When Dolores came back to the counter, she was carrying a manila envelope that was thicker than I had expected. She set it down carefully, the way a person sets down something that has surprised them. I pulled everything the system has, she said. Her voice had gone quieter than before. 156 packages over 13 years. 4 addresses. She slid the envelope across the counter. Hank, I have been doing this job since before some of these packages were sent. I have never seen a record that looks like this one. I took the envelope. I thanked her. I walked back out to the truck. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes and read through the first dozen pages. What Dolores had said was right. The pattern was there, plain as grain in a split board. The earliest packages, sent between 2010 and 2017, were stamped refused, clean and deliberate. Someone at the receiving address had seen my name on the label and sent them back without opening them. But starting in 2018, the stamp changed. Return to sender unclaimed. No refusal. No deliberate rejection at the door. These packages had never reached the door. They had been intercepted somewhere earlier in the delivery chain, at a sorting facility or a carrier depot, before they ever made it to Travis's house. Someone had not just been refusing my packages. For the past 5 years, someone had been pulling them out of the system entirely. I drove the truck north out of Aspen, past the edge of town, up a county road that most people do not know exists. 12 miles in, I turned onto a gravel track through the trees and parked in front of a small cabin with smoke coming from the chimney. Sam Redhawk was in the yard splitting wood. He was 68 years old, Lakota Sioux, and had lived on this stretch of mountain longer than I had. We had met in the autumn of 1989, in the aftermath of a tunnel collapse at the Elsinore shaft of the Smuggler Mountain operation. When a crossbeam gave way, and I had gone down into the debris to reach 2 trapped workers and very nearly did not come back out. Sam had been working the surface crew that day. He was the one who came in after me. We had been friends ever since, in the way that men who have seen each other at their worst sometimes become friends without ceremony, without much conversation required. He stopped splitting when he heard my truck, set the axe against the chopping block, and waited while I walked across the yard. I handed him the manila envelope without saying anything. He read for a long time. The smoke from his chimney moved straight up into the still air. A magpie landed on the fence post and left again. 4 addresses, Sam said finally. He moved 3 times in 13 years. And every time he moved, the packages kept getting returned. Sam looked up. Hank. He did not refuse these from his front door. The early ones, yes. But the later ones, somebody inside the Denver distribution network was flagging your return address, pulling your packages before they went out on the truck. I had suspected this. Hearing it said aloud was different. He had help, I said. Somebody on the inside, maybe paid, maybe a favor. Sam folded the papers back into the envelope and handed it to me. This is not a man who got angry and stopped answering your calls. This is a man who built a system. The cold had settled deeper into the afternoon. Sam looked at me for a long moment in the way that Lakota men sometimes look at a problem, not at the surface of it, but through it, to the structure underneath. You hunt deer, he said. You do not tell the deer you are hunting. He agreed to be my witness that evening, over coffee at his kitchen table, with no paperwork and no ceremony, just a handshake and his word, which in 34 years had never once been worth less than the moment he gave it. Driving back down the mountain in the last of the afternoon light, I turned the envelope over in my mind. That was the moment Travis stopped being my son. He became a board with hidden warp, and when you find hidden warp in a board, you do not try to talk it straight. You cut it where the truth is, and you build from what remains. You do not build a cabin on a mountain without checking which way the wind blows before you set the first post. I had forgotten that lesson somewhere in the 13 years of hoping. Diana Reyes Calloway had not forgotten anything. I drove down to Denver 9 days after the post office visit. On a Tuesday morning in late January, when the weather had cleared enough to make the highway passable. Diana's office was on the 22nd floor of a building on 17th Street, and her window looked west toward the Front Range, toward the mountains I had just come down from. I noticed that first the way she had positioned her desk so that the mountains were always in her line of sight. It told me something about how she thought. She was 50 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had no patience for things that required maintenance. And she had the kind of stillness about her that comes from spending decades in rooms where the wrong word at the wrong moment costs people everything they have. She was the best estate attorney in Colorado, according to my accountant, who was not a man given to exaggeration. I laid the evidence on her conference table in the order I had assembled it. The postal records from Dolores, the envelope with the 156 tracking numbers, the photograph Walt had shown me on his phone, printed now on plain paper, a timeline I had written out by hand, 13 years of dates and addresses and patterns. Diana listened without interrupting. She read each document in sequence, her expression unchanged. When I finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded on the table in front of her. How long ago did you find out? She asked. 11 days. She nodded slowly. And you have not contacted your son? No. Good. She picked up a legal pad and uncapped a pen. Keep it that way. What came next was the most useful 45 minutes I had spent in years. Diana did not offer sympathy, and she did not offer outrage, which was exactly what I needed. She offered structure. A fortress, she said, was not built in a single day. But it could be built in 90, if the work was done in the right order. She wrote 5 items on the legal pad, numbered and underlined. First, quarterly cognitive assessments, beginning within the week, conducted by a physician I trusted and documented with the kind of precision that would hold up in a courtroom. They will claim you are declining, she said. We build a paper trail that proves otherwise before the claim is even made. Second, an irrevocable trust, structured immediately, naming the grandchildren as sole beneficiaries with access conditions that could not be altered by any outside party. Once this is filed, the assets inside it are beyond reach, not disputed, not negotiated beyond reach. Third, a camera system, professional grade, legally installed in common areas only, with documentation proving the installation date, the scope, and the chain of custody for any footage recorded. If they come into your home and attempt to coerce you, I want every word on record, court admissible, time-stamped, and backed up somewhere they cannot physically destroy. Fourth, a formal witness agreement with someone already known to you, someone credible, someone who could testify without being dismissed. Not a hired investigator, someone whose relationship with you predates this situation by years. Fifth, a restructuring of the royalty payment routing from any pending financial transactions, so that incoming funds cleared through channels that were documented and protected before Travis could identify them. She set the pen down and looked at me across the table. Men like your son, she said, do not come back for reconciliation. They do not come back out of guilt or regret or because they have suddenly decided to do the right thing. They come back when they smell money. The question is never if, it is when, and how prepared you are when it happens. I had known this, in the way you know a thing that you have been avoiding thinking about directly. Hearing it said plainly, without softening, was useful in the way that a plumb line is useful. It did not tell you anything you could not have found out yourself. It just told you faster and truer. There is one other thing, Diana said. She paused, choosing her words. You mentioned a corporate acquisition offer, the manufacturing consultancy. I have not told anyone about it. How close is it to closing? 30 days to final signature, 90 days to wire transfer after that. She wrote a number on the corner of the legal pad, $26 million. Circled it once. This changes the timeline, she said. Once this amount moves into your accounts, you become a different kind of target. Not a father to be managed, an estate to be seized. She tore the corner off the pad and slid it across the table to me. We begin the trust filings this week. Before that number arrives, I drove back up the mountain that evening with 5 items written on a torn piece of legal paper in my shirt pocket. The peaks were orange in the last light. The highway was empty. I kept the truck at a steady pace and did not hurry, because there was no point in hurrying. The work was laid out. The order was clear. What you build in the right sequence holds. What you rush falls apart at the joints. 3 weeks later, the wire transfer hit my account. $26 million. And the countdown had started, even though I did not know it yet. $26 million is a number that changes the air around a man. I signed the Mountain Tech Industries acquisition papers on a Thursday morning in mid-February in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Denver, surrounded by attorneys I had never met before and would likely never see again. The lead counsel for Mountain Tech slid the final page across the table to me, pointed to the signature line, and said it was a pleasure doing business. I signed with the same pen I had used to sign my first patent filing in 1991. It seemed like the right instrument for the occasion. The patent itself had come out of a problem I spent 3 years trying to solve: a pressure equalizing valve system for confined underground spaces that reduced the risk of catastrophic atmospheric collapse in deep shaft operations. The kind of problem that seems abstract until you have been inside a tunnel when the air goes wrong. I had been inside one in '89, which was why I spent 3 years solving it. In the winter of 2008, a crew of 23 miners at a zinc operation in New Mexico survived a partial shaft collapse because the ventilation system held pressure long enough for the rescue team to reach them. The incident report credited the Sullivan equalization valve by name. I had read that report sitting at my workbench with Caroline standing behind me, her hand on my shoulder, not saying anything, which was how she expressed things that she felt deeply enough to trust the silence. After the signing, I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes before starting the truck. I thought about what Caroline had said to me in 2017, near the end, when the hospice nurse had left for the evening and the house was quiet, and she was more lucid than she had been in days. She had taken my hand and said, "Whatever it pays, save it for the grandchildren. Do not spend it on grief." I had been spending it on grief for 6 years. I intended to stop. The drive to Lloyd Mercer's, to Dr. Howard Petrosky's clinic took 40 minutes. Howard was 70 years old, the senior physician in a 2-doctor practice on the north side of Aspen, and we had known each other since we were both young men trying to figure out what our lives were supposed to look like. He had gone into medicine. I had gone into mining and then manufacturing. We had stayed in touch across the decades the way old friends do holiday cards, the occasional lunch that stretched into the afternoon, phone calls on birthdays. He met me at the door of his office, not an exam room. He had read Diana's protocol the night before and had questions already written on a notepad, which told me he had not slept particularly well. "She is very thorough," he said. "That is why I kept her on retainer. Sit down, Hank. Let us get started." The evaluation took just over 2 hours. Memory sequences, lists of unrelated words recalled forward and backward. Stories read aloud and then retested 20 minutes later. Problem-solving, pattern recognition, logical sequencing, spatial reasoning, executive function decision-making scenarios, risk assessment, the kind of questions designed to test whether a man is capable of managing his own affairs without assistance. Howard documented everything in real time, typing notes directly into the medical record as we went. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way doctors look at patients when the news is better than expected. "Your cognitive function scores in the 96th percentile for your age group," he said. "Executive function excellent. Memory recall superior. No indicators of decline, early or otherwise." He paused. "If someone tries to claim you are incompetent, they will have to explain how a man in cognitive decline scores this way on standardized assessment. That is the intention," I said. Howard nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its clinical tone. "I need you to understand something, Hank. I have seen this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the shape of it." He described it without using the clinical term, which told me he wanted me to hear it plainly rather than academically. Predatory guardianship. The pattern, he said, was almost always the same. Someone close to the target, usually family, arrives with a posture of concern. They establish a narrative of decline. They create urgency. They produce documents that require immediate signature, and they apply pressure in the form of love, or guilt, or manufactured emergency. The critical moment, Howard said, was always the same. It arrived when someone said, "We need this signed today," or "The lawyer is waiting," or "If you do not sign this now, something terrible will happen." That is the moment they reveal themselves, he said. Because a person who genuinely wants to help you does not require your signature before you have had time to read the document. He wrote his private cell number on a prescription slip and slid it across the desk. "You call me before you sign anything, anything at all. I do not care what time it is." I folded the slip and put it in my shirt pocket beside Diana's torn piece of legal pad. 2 phone numbers. 2 people who knew the shape of what was coming. I drove home up the mountain pass as the sun went down behind the range. The sky going from orange to rose to the deep, clear blue that comes just before dark at altitude. The road was empty. The truck held the curves without complaint. That night, I knew exactly what kind of trap I was building. I just did not know yet which animal would walk into it first. A trap should look like the thing the prey came for. That was the principle I worked from through the last week of March and the first 2 weeks of April, standing at the bench in my workshop with pine and black walnut and a set of carving tools I had been sharpening for 40 years. The cameras arrived in plain brown boxes from a security supplier in Colorado Springs, 8 units. Professional grade, high-definition audio and video with night vision capability. Each one no larger than a walnut shell once the housing was removed. Legal in every common area of a private residence. Documented, dated, and registered with Diana's office the same day they were delivered. I did not mount them on walls. I did not attach them to shelves or brackets. I built them homes, 8 birdhouses, each one carved from ponderosa pine, with a walnut accent panel on the front face and a hand-painted opening sized for a mountain bluebird. From the outside, they were decorative pieces, the kind of thing a man who works with his hands makes in his spare time and hangs around the house because he has the skill and no particular reason not to. From the inside, each one held a shallow cavity behind the nesting chamber, accessible through a sliding panel in the base, sized precisely to hold one camera unit, with the lens aligned to a pinhole in the front panel. 4 owl clocks followed the same logic. Carved walnut, each one housing a pendulum clock movement behind the face and a camera unit in the hollow body of the owl. Lens set behind a decorative eye that was just slightly larger than the others and painted to match. I spent 17 days on them. Sam came up the mountain on the 3rd day and stayed through most of it, working quietly at the second bench while I worked at the first, sanding and fitting and checking tolerances. We did not talk much. Men who have known each other long enough learn which silences are useful and which ones need filling. On the 9th day, Sam set down the piece he was working on and picked up one of the finished birdhouses and turned it slowly in his hands. "You made something like this before," he said. It was not a question. I kept working. 2014. I made 6 of them. Smaller, one for each grandchild per year, to hang in their rooms. What happened to them? Same as everything else. Returned. Sam set the birdhouse down and went back to his sanding. Neither of us said anything else about it for the rest of the day. The work required patience, which was not a problem. I had spent 13 years practicing patience. What the work also required was precision. A camera mounted 2 degrees off its optimal angle was a camera that missed the corner of a room. And a corner of a room was where people stood when they thought no one could see them. I tested each unit individually before installation, checking the field of view on a tablet screen, adjusting the pinhole angle by fractions, verifying audio sensitivity against a normal speaking voice at the far end of each intended room. The work itself was good, not the purpose of it, but the work. The wood responded to the tools the way wood always responds when you are paying attention honestly, without pretense, giving back exactly what you put in. I installed them over 4 days in the 3rd week of April. 2 birdhouses in the living room, positioned to eliminate blind spots near the fireplace and the main seating area. 1 in the kitchen, covering the table and the entrance from the hallway. 2 in the hallway, 1 at each end. 1 in the dining room, wide-angle lens covering the full table length. 1 in the workshop, for reasons I did not examine too carefully at the time. 1 in the corridor outside the guest rooms, where conversations held in lowered voices at late hours would still be within audio range. The 4 owl clocks went at elevation on shelves and over door frames, where the downward angle gave each lens a wider field of view. The system went live on the 28th of March. I spent a week testing it obsessively, walking through every room, speaking at normal volume, checking that the audio registered without distortion and that the night vision activated correctly when the lights went down. The footage uploaded automatically to a cloud server managed through Diana's firm, backed up in triplicate, physically inaccessible from the cabin. On the last evening of testing, Sam sat with me at the kitchen table while I reviewed the day's footage on the tablet. We watched me eat breakfast alone at 7:15 in the morning, watched me carry my coffee to the workshop and stand at the bench for a while without picking up any tools, just standing there looking at the wood. Sam watched the screen for a long time without speaking. Then he said it the way Lakota men say things that matter without softness, without apology, straight to the bone. This will be the hardest part, brother. Watching yourself be alone on tape every day until they come. He was right. I knew he was right before he finished the sentence. But I also knew what was on the other end of the waiting. And that was enough to keep the cameras running. They came up the mountain at dusk, exactly as Diana said they would, like wolves following the smell of something wounded. 6 months had passed since the cameras went live. 6 months of footage that showed nothing more dramatic than an old man eating alone, working alone, reading alone, sleeping alone. 6 months of Sam calling every week to ask if anything had moved. 6 months of Diana updating the trust documents and the cognitive assessments and the witness agreements. Keeping the fortress in repair the way you keep a roof in repair, not because it is leaking yet, but because you know the season is coming. Then the second Friday of November arrived, and with it, the first real snow of the season. And at 4:47 in the afternoon, I was standing at the workshop bench, fitting a new handle to a draw knife, when I heard a sound I had not heard on this road in years. A V8 engine, working hard against a grade. I set the draw knife down. I did not move toward the window immediately. I stood at the bench and listened to the engine note change as the vehicle crested the last switchback and leveled out onto the gravel clearing. Then I walked to the workshop window and looked out through the glass. The Range Rover was black, late model, with Colorado plates I did not recognize. It sat in the clearing with the engine running and the headlights on, illuminating the snow that was still falling in long, slow curtains across the mountain face. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the truck and the snow and the last gray light going out of the sky behind the peaks. Then the driver's door opened, and Travis got out. He was 43 years old, and he looked like a man who had been working very hard at appearing relaxed. The jacket was expensive, the kind designed to signal casual wealth in settings where such signals matter. He stood beside the truck for a moment, looking at the cabin. And then he looked at the workshop and found me in the window and raised one hand. I did not raise mine. I watched. He opened the passenger door for Brenda. She came out smoothing her coat, her face already arranged into the expression she had prepared for this moment, soft, concerned. The particular look of a woman who has rehearsed being warmly heartbroken. She had been planning this visit for longer than she would ever say. Mason came next, climbing down from the rear door with the careful movements of a 10-year-old who has been told to behave and is trying to remember what that means. He was taller than I had imagined from the photograph at Walt's gas station. He had his father's jaw, and he held himself slightly apart from both parents, which told me more than any photograph could. Then the far rear door opened, and Lila got out. She was 14 years old, with dark hair cut straight across and a navy blue backpack worn on both shoulders. And she was the only person in that clearing who did not look at the cabin first. She looked at the workshop. She looked at the birdhouse mounted above the workshop door. Then she looked directly at me through the window, not in the way children look at strangers, in the way engineers examine a structure they are trying to understand. I left the workshop and walked across the clearing. Travis met me halfway. He put both arms around me the way you hug a man you have been rehearsing, hugging the right duration, the right amount of pressure, designed to be witnessed and remembered. "Dad," he said, and his voice was warm and his eyes were calculating, and both things were happening at the same time. "We just want a real Christmas. Please, the kids have been asking about you." I let him hold on for the right amount of time. Of course," I said. My voice came out steady and quiet, which was exactly what I needed. The cabin's been quiet too long. Brenda hugged me next. She smelled of expensive perfume and her embrace lasted 2 seconds longer than necessary, which was a technique, not an accident. Mason shook my hand with the solemnity of a boy who has been coached on the matter and is determined to get it right. Lila stood 3 feet back from the rest of them and watched. "Lila," Brenda said, with the particular brightness mothers use when they are managing a situation rather than experiencing it. "Say hello to your grandfather." Lila looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Hello, Grandpa?" Her voice was flat and exact, without performance. It was the most honest thing anyone in that clearing had said in the past 5 minutes. 12 Louis Vuitton suitcases came out of the cargo area. I counted them without appearing to count them. 12 suitcases for a Christmas visit. A man packs 12 suitcases when he does not intend to go home on the schedule he has announced. I helped carry bags to the porch. I moved slowly, with the careful deliberateness of an older man who is being thoughtful about his footing in snow. Not theatrical, just slightly less certain than I actually was. The first note of a performance I had been rehearsing since February, at the cabin door. Everyone filed inside except Lila. She stopped on the threshold and turned back and looked at me across the porch. Her eyes moved once to the birdhouse above the door, then back to my face. The look lasted exactly 1 full second. Then she stepped inside. I stood on the porch alone for a moment in the snow, the cold air coming down off the peaks, the cameras running behind every window. My 14-year-old granddaughter had just looked at a hidden camera and then looked at me. And something in her expression told me she already understood more than I had planned for. I just did not know yet how much. My granddaughter brought a piece of evidence to dinner that night. She did not know yet what it was, but she knew it was something. The first hour inside the cabin had the particular texture of a performance being given by people who have rehearsed separately and are now trying to match their versions of the same story. Travis moved through the kitchen with the ease of a man making himself at home in a place he intends to own. Brenda straightened things that did not need straightening and asked me twice if I was warm enough, which was not concern but inventory. Mason explored the living room with the careful attention of a child in an unfamiliar space, touching the woodwork on the door frames, running his fingers along the edge of the mantelpiece. Lila sat in the chair nearest the window with her backpack still on her lap, watching. I started the performance at the kitchen counter. I reached for the wall calendar, the old paper kind. The one I had hung deliberately because it was the kind of thing a declining man might squint at in confusion, and I brought my face close to it, then stepped back, furrowing my brow. "Is it still October?" I said. I keep losing track. Travis's head came up from his phone. Brenda turned from the stove where she had already begun positioning herself as the person who knew where things were kept. "It's November 15th. Dad," Brenda said, her voice laced with the practiced warmth of a woman who has been told exactly how to say this. "You mentioned this same confusion yesterday. Remember we talked about it after breakfast?" I had not mentioned it yesterday. There had been no breakfast together yesterday. They had arrived 40 minutes ago. But now, in the minds of anyone who heard her, there was a version of the previous morning where I had already shown this symptom. I nodded vaguely and went back to the counter. I poured coffee for everyone. When I reached Travis's cup, I let my hand tremble. Not dramatically, but specifically, the small, controlled uncertainty of an older man whose grip is no longer fully reliable. The coffee missed the cup by half an inch, spreading across the counter in a dark stain. I jerked back, startled by my own mistake. Travis and Brenda exchanged a glance across the kitchen. Quick, almost imperceptible. The glance of two people who have just seen exactly what they came to see. What you show people is what they record. I had just made my first deposit into their version of events. Dinner was roast chicken that Brenda had brought from a Denver grocery, already cooked and packed in foil, which told me she had planned to be here before she asked permission. Mason talked about his school in Denver, a robotics project, a friend named Carter who could do a backflip, a teacher he did not like because she gave too much homework on Fridays. He spoke the way children speak when they are nervous, and filling silence is easier than sitting in it. Lila did not speak at dinner. She ate carefully, watched everyone in turn, and when she was finished, she set her utensils parallel across her plate in a way that suggested long habit. It was after dinner, while Travis and Brenda were in the living room, discussing something in low voices that they thought were lower than they were, that Lila came to the kitchen. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she came fully inside. Then she set her backpack on the counter and unzipped the front pocket and took out something wrapped in a piece of flannel cloth. She unwrapped it without speaking and set it on the counter between us. It was the wooden doll I had carved in the spring of 2015, 8 inches tall, articulated arms, a simple painted face, in the base, in letters small enough to require looking closely. The initials C.S. and the year. I had made it for her 6th birthday. I had sent it in June of 2015. I had watched the tracking number sit in transit for 4 days before it was marked return to sender, unclaimed, and I had placed it in the maple chest with everything else. I was looking at it now on my own kitchen counter. 9 years later. Still in the flannel cloth I had not wrapped it in. "This was a gift to me when I was 6, Lila said. Her voice was careful and level, the way she said everything. "Mom said it came from a store in Denver. She said a lady named Mrs. Henderson bought it from a craft fair near the university." She paused. I looked for the craft fair. I looked for Mrs. Henderson. Neither one exists. She looked at me across the counter, so I want to know where it actually came from. Every instinct I had said to tell her the truth right then. 13 years of it, compressed into a single moment, ready to come out. I could see it from her face that she already knew the answer, or at least the shape of it. She had known for years. She had carried this doll across state lines in her backpack on the specific chance that she would be standing close enough to the right person to finally ask. I breathed. I kept my voice quiet. "That is a beautiful doll, sweetheart," I said. "Whoever made it must have loved you very much." Lila held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. once, slowly, and wrapped the doll back in its flannel cloth and put it in her backpack. She did not press. She did not need to. She had her answer. I went to bed early, claiming fatigue, and sat in the dark of my room for an hour thinking about a 14-year-old who had been carrying that doll for years, waiting to ask the right person. I was that person. But first I had to listen to what came after midnight, when they thought no one was watching. A camera does not blink. A camera does not get tired. A camera does not love you, and it does not hate you, and it does not choose what to remember and what to set aside. That is why I trusted them more than my own son. I had not slept deeply since the Range Rover came up the mountain. I lay in my room with the small monitor on the nightstand beside me, 8 thumbnail feeds glowing in the dark, and I dozed in the shallow way of a man who is listening for something specific, even while his eyes are closed. At 1:47 in the morning, I came fully awake. Nothing on the screen had changed. The cabin was quiet. All 8 feeds showed empty rooms, the low light of a house at rest. But something had changed in the quality of the silence, a door handle, or a footstep absorbed by the floorboards, or simply the shift in air pressure that a moving person creates. I had spent enough years in underground spaces to know that some sounds register below the level of conscious hearing. I sat up and watched the monitor. At 2:03, the living room feed moved. Travis came through the hallway doorway first, wearing a dark sweater and carrying his phone face down at his side. He crossed the living room to the far window and stood with his back to the main camera, looking out at the snow. A moment later, Brenda followed, wrapped in a fleece she had not worn at dinner. She positioned herself near the hallway entrance, where she could hear both the corridor behind her and the room in front. They had done this before. The placement was too deliberate to be accidental. The audio was clean. The birdhouse on the mantel shelf, 6 feet from where Travis was standing, had a microphone sensitive enough to register a whisper from across the room. The Denver deal is bleeding, Travis said. He kept his voice low but did not whisper, which told me he thought the nearest occupied bedroom was far enough away. 3,000,008 in arrears. I have 30 days before the note comes due and I cannot cover it. I need to move faster than we planned. Brenda crossed her arms. Then we get the power of attorney before the end of the week. He is halfway there already. Did you see him with the coffee tonight? He is better than I expected. More coherent. He is performing. Travis. Old men do that. They rally for company. Give it a few days. The confusion will come back. She said it with the practiced confidence of a woman who had researched the subject. Travis turned from the window. There is something else. Something I have not told you because I wanted the assay confirmed before I said it out loud. He paused. Mountain Tech's old geological contractor ran a secondary survey on this area 18 months ago, before the acquisition. The results came across my desk through a contact at the firm. Brenda waited. Steve, there is a significant lithium deposit under this mountain, Travis said. Not trace amounts, commercial grade, sufficient for large-scale extraction. The kind of thing that gets bought by battery manufacturers for 9 figures. The room went quiet except for the sound of the wind outside. 9 figures, Brenda said, if we hold the deed and the mineral rights, which we do not. Currently. He does. Travis looked at his phone. If we get the power of attorney and the property transfer completed, before he understands what he is signing. The mineral rights transfer with the deed. Standard language. He would not catch it. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, with the monitor on my lap, and felt something settle in my chest, like cold water finding its level. This was not grief. Grief has a tremor in it. What I felt was the opposite, a stillness so complete it was almost comfortable. The way extreme cold can feel almost warm at the edge of hypothermia. He had not come for Christmas. He had come for 9 figures in lithium. What about the boy? Brenda asked. Mason is starting to ask questions about the wooden toys, about why Grandpa never came to visit. He is 10 years old, Travis said. You keep telling him the same thing we have always told him, that his grandfather chose to stay away, that the gifts he has came from other people. Children that age believe what they are told often enough. He will come around. He said it the way a man discusses a maintenance problem on a piece of equipment. Not with cruelty, exactly. With indifference, which is worse. A child will believe what he is told often enough. I thought about Mason at the dinner table, talking about his robotics project and his friend Carter and the teacher who gave too much homework on Fridays. I thought about the way he had run his fingers along the doorframe woodwork, the way children touch things that interest them without knowing why. Travis had been telling that boy a story for 10 years, and the boy was starting to notice that the story had edges. Brenda shifted near the hallway entrance and said something that brought me back fully to the monitor. And Lila. The 2 words hung in the living room air. Travis was quiet for a moment. What he said next was the moment my soul went quiet, the kind of quiet a man settles into when he is deciding how much mercy he has left in him, and finding the answer smaller than he hoped. There is a moment when love stops being love and becomes something harder. It does not arrive with noise. It arrives in the space between 2 words, in the pause before an answer. When you realize that the person speaking does not share the same definition of the people you are both talking about. And Lila. Brenda had asked. Travis was quiet for 3 seconds. I counted them on the monitor. Lila is the variable, he said. She notices things. You know she does. She has been noticing things since she was old enough to organize what she sees. He turned from the window and sat down on the arm of the sofa, the way a man sits when he is settling into a decision he has already made. But Lila is also autistic, and that is not a liability for us. That is a tool. Brenda did not say anything. Anything she observes, anything she questions, anything she tells someone, we frame it as confusion, disordered perception, pattern fixation. There is not a family court in Colorado that will weight the testimony of a 14-year-old with her diagnosis over a notarized medical opinion. He paused. I have already spoken to a specialist in Denver, a psychiatrist who works with families in transitional situations. If Lila becomes a problem, we adjust her medication. There are compliant prescriptions available for cases like hers. More sedating, less functional. She simply becomes easier to manage. The room on the monitor was completely still. Travis, Brenda said. Her voice had dropped to something I had not heard from her before, not warmth, not performance, but something closer to genuine unease. That is our daughter. She is also the only person in this house who could derail everything we have been building toward for 14 months. He looked at Brenda directly. I am not asking you to agree with me. I am asking you to choose Lila's comfort or the future we have been planning. Because I am telling you right now, I cannot have both. Brenda was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that is itself a choice. She nodded once, barely perceptibly, and looked away toward the window. I had been still on my bed for the past 9 minutes. I did not move. Travis continued. He spoke about Quentin Marsh, a Denver attorney he had used before on a commercial lease dispute. A man Travis described as pragmatic, which was a word that in this context meant willing. Quentin would arrive on Tuesday with 2 sets of documents. The first was a power of attorney, broad and immediate, covering financial decisions, property transactions, and medical directives. The second was a voluntary commitment petition, 72-hour psychiatric hold, signed by a physician whose name I did not recognize, authorizing temporary placement at a facility in Aurora pending a competency evaluation. Not a private clinic, not somewhere with views of the mountains. A state-contracted facility in a Denver suburb that processed involuntary holds for patients without private insurance. Once the hold is in place, Travis said, we execute the property transfer. The mineral rights language is buried in the standard deed boilerplate. His attorney will flag it eventually, but by then the signatures will be notarized and filed. Unwinding that takes 18 months minimum, even with a good lawyer. Brenda asked one more question. And by Christmas? By Christmas, Travis said. This mountain is ours. Brenda almost smiled, not with happiness, with relief, which is what people feel when a plan they have been afraid to believe in finally seems solid enough to stand on. They went back down the hallway to their room. The living room feed went still. The audio registered nothing but the low sound of the wind outside and the occasional creak of the cabin settling in the cold. I sat on the edge of my bed with the monitor in my lap for 31 minutes without moving. There is a thing that happens to a man when the last version of hope he has been carrying finally closes. It is not collapse. Collapse is for men who have not been preparing. It is more like the moment a chisel finds the grain and the wood opens cleanly, a release of pressure that has been building for longer than you knew, resolved all at once into something sharp and workable. I was done grieving Travis. I had been done for some time, if I was being honest with myself. What I had been grieving was the version of him that existed before the evidence made the real version impossible to argue with. That version was gone. It had probably been gone for years. What remained was the work. At 3:47 in the morning, I picked up my phone and called Diana. She answered on the second ring. They intend to medicate Lila, I said. Suppress her. There is a Denver psychiatrist involved. I need everything you have accelerated, and I need Quentin Marsh identified and backgrounded before Tuesday morning. There was a brief silence on Diana's end. Not surprise. Recalibration. I will have my team on it by sunrise, she said. Hank, do not change anything about your behavior tomorrow. Nothing. Give them exactly what they expect to see. I know. And Hank, her voice shifted slightly. We are going to protect that girl. I set the phone down and stood at the bedroom window, looking out toward the workshop. The snow had stopped. The mountain was perfectly still, the way it gets in the deep of a winter night when the wind drops, and every sound carries, and the cold has an almost physical weight to it. They thought they were planning my erasure. They did not know I was recording my resurrection. And the morning would bring something they had not planned for at all, a 14-year-old who had been gathering her own evidence for 3 years and was nearly out of patience. Some children are born with the gift of seeing. The world calls it a disorder. I called it the most beautiful thing my granddaughter ever brought to my workshop. I was at the bench at 7:15 Sunday morning, running a block plane along the edge of a walnut board that did not need planing. because my hands needed something honest to do after a night like the one I had just spent. The workshop was cold. I had not lit the wood stove yet. The cold was useful. It kept me precise. I heard the workshop door open behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I finished the stroke, set the plane down, and turned. Lila stood in the doorway, wearing the gray sweater from the night before, and her navy backpack on both shoulders. As though she had packed for a conversation she intended to see through to the end. She did not knock because she had already entered. She looked at the workbench, at the tools in their rack, at the stove in the corner, at the birdhouse mounted on the wall above the north window. Then she looked at me. I counted. She said, 8 birdhouses and 12 owl clocks. She paused, correcting herself with the precision of someone who finds approximation physically uncomfortable. 4 owl clocks, 8 birdhouses and 4 owl clocks. None of them appear in any photograph my mother showed me of this house from before 3 months ago. The wood on the mounting hardware is not weathered. The paint on 2 of the birdhouses still has brush marks that have not fully cured. She stopped. I think they have cameras in them. I set the plane on the bench. What else have you noticed? I said. She came fully inside and let the door close behind her. She unslung her backpack and set it on the low stool near the wood stove and unzipped the main compartment. She took out a navy blue composition notebook and set it on the bench between us. I have been keeping notes since I was 9 years old, she said. Things that did not add up. Things my parents said that contradicted each other, or contradicted what I could verify independently. She opened the notebook to the first page. The handwriting was small and extremely regular, the kind that comes from a person who treats each letter as a unit of information rather than an expression of personality. I have 11 pages. I looked at the notebook without touching it. The wooden toys are in there, she said. 18 of them, over 11 years. Each one my mother attributed to a different source. A craft fair, a school auction, a woman named Henderson who does not appear to exist in any directory I have checked. The toys share construction characteristics. Same joinery technique on the articulated pieces. Same finish on the painted surfaces. Same tool marks on the carved sections. She looked up at me. One person made all of them, and that person was not Mrs. Henderson. The workshop was very quiet. Outside. The mountain held its breath the way it does in the deep of a November morning, when the snow has settled and the wind has not yet started. My brain does not forget things. Grandpa. People think that is a weakness. For me, it is a record keeper, and I have kept a very complete record. She said it without pride and without apology. It was simply a fact about how she was built. I told her the truth, not all of it at once, and not in the order it had happened to me, but the essential shape of it, 13 years. 156 wooden toys, a maple chest under the workbench, a manila envelope from the post office, a photograph of Mason calling another man Grandpa. I told her about Caroline, about the music box that played 8 bars of You Are My Sunshine, about the initials carved in the base of the doll she had carried in her backpack across 2 states. She listened without interrupting. She did not cry. She did not reach for the composition notebook to write anything down. She stood very still, the way she stood when she was absorbing rather than responding. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I knew you did not leave us, she said. The story never held together correctly. The math did not work. If you had chosen to walk away, there would have been a period of contact first, a reduction. People who stop loving their families do not stop all at once. They taper. She paused. There was no taper. You were simply gone one day, according to everything they told us. And things that end, that abruptly usually end because someone made them end. She was 14 years old. People do not carve dolls for children they do not love, she said. That is not a thing people do. I had to look away for a moment, toward the window, toward the mountain outside. I gave myself 3 seconds. That was all I allowed. When I looked back, she was watching me with the steady attention she gave everything that mattered to her. I need you to be a witness, I told her. When the time comes, not now, but when it does, I need you to tell the truth about what you have seen and what you have kept in that notebook. Yes, she said, without hesitation, without the pause of a person who needs to consider. She said it the way Sam Redhawk had said it over coffee at his kitchen table 10 months ago, with the finality of a person whose word has the same weight every time they give it. Grandpa, she said then, her voice shifting by a fraction of a tone. Why didn't you fight harder to see us? The question hung in the workshop air, sharper than any chisel I owned, and my answer would either lose her or bind her to me for the rest of my life. There was no middle ground between those two things. When the predator finally arrives at your door, he does not come with fangs bared. He comes with a leather briefcase and a Yale law degree, and a smile designed to make you feel that your confusion is the most natural thing in the world. But I am getting ahead of myself again. First, there was Sunday morning. First, there was a question from a 14-year-old that I owed an honest answer. I told Lila what I could tell her without saying the things that would hurt her in ways she was not ready for yet. I told her that I had fought the way I knew how to fight, which was by keeping records and keeping my door open and refusing to stop sending. I told her that some walls are built by people who know exactly what they are doing, and that a man pressing his hand against a wall from the outside cannot always feel where the mortar is weak until he has been pressing for a very long time. She thought about that for a moment. You were waiting for the mortar to fail, she said. Something like that. She looked at the workshop wall, at the tools in their rack, at the birdhouse above the window. Then she looked back at me with the steadiness that I had already come to understand was simply how she inhabited a room. I am ready now, she said. Whenever you need me. She picked up her backpack and left without ceremony. Which was exactly right. Lila did not deal in ceremony. She dealt in facts and timing, which were the only two things that mattered in the days that followed. Tuesday arrived the way Tuesdays arrive in November in the mountains, gray, cold, and entirely indifferent to what you had planned for it. Quentin Marsh pulled up in a silver sedan at 2:40 in the afternoon. He was 47 years old, with hair that had been cut recently and expensively, and he wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and carried it with the ease of a man who had been wearing suits of that quality since law school. He had the particular smoothness of an attorney who has spent 2 decades in rooms where someone is always being asked to sign something they have not fully read. Travis met him at the door with the warmth of a man greeting a necessary accomplice rather than a welcome guest. "Dad," Travis said, turning to me with the solicitude he had been practicing all week. "This is Mr. Marsh. He has been helping us with some estate planning matters. Just routine protective documentation. To make sure you are covered." Quentin extended his hand. His grip was firm and calibrated, confident enough to project competence, gentle enough to avoid aggression. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "Travis has spoken about you at length. It is a pleasure to finally meet." He followed Travis to the dining table and set his briefcase down with the practiced ease of a man who had done this same thing in many different dining rooms, for many different families, with many different old men sitting across from him. He opened the clasps and spread the documents in a practiced sequence. Power of attorney. Broad form, immediate and durable, covering financial decisions, property transfers, and medical directives. A voluntary commitment petition, 72 hours. With a physician's signature I did not recognize on a letterhead from a Denver psychiatric practice I had not heard of before Diana's team had identified it that morning. A trust modification document transferring administrative control to Travis with what appeared to be standard protective language but contained, in paragraph 14 on page 6, a mineral rights clause that transferred subsurface extraction rights along with the surface deed. Quentin launched into his presentation. He spoke quickly, using the specific kind of legal language designed not to explain, but to overwhelm a steady stream of terms that each made sense individually, but assembled together into a structure that was difficult to follow at speed. I let my eyes move across the pages without appearing to read them. I let my brow furrow slightly. I let the pen he slid toward me rest in front of my hands without picking it up. Brenda appeared at my elbow. "It is just precaution." "Dad," she said, her voice warm and pitched slightly too loud. The way people speak to someone they believe cannot quite hear correctly. "To protect you. So we can help you manage things when they get confusing. You know how the banking calls have been upsetting you." I had not been upset by banking calls. There had been no banking calls. But now there was a record of someone saying so in front of 2 witnesses. I reached for the pen. I let my hand close around it slowly, with the deliberate care of an older man managing a tremor. I brought the pen to the signature line on the power of attorney and paused. Then I set it down. "Don't I need?" I said. And I let the pause stretch just long enough to register. My doctor's certification first, Dr. Petrosky mentioned something last month about documentation before something like this could be signed. The room shifted. Quentin's expression did not change, but his eyes did a quick recalibration behind the professional surface. The look of a man whose prepared script has just been interrupted by a line he did not write. Travis's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Dad," he said, "Mr. Marsh is an attorney. He knows what is legally required." "I would like to call Dr. Petrosky first," I said. "He is my doctor. He would know if I need something like this. Wouldn't he?" The dining room went quiet. Then Travis's phone rang in his jacket pocket. He silenced it without looking. It rang again. He silenced it again. A third time. On the 4th ring, he looked at the screen, and his face went a color I had never seen on my own son, the white of a man who has just understood that something he believed was solid has been hollow for longer than he knew. Desperation makes men do things they would never have agreed to 6 months earlier. My son had just crossed his own line. He just did not know I had cameras watching him cross it. Travis stepped out onto the porch to take the call. Through the dining room window, I could see him pacing the length of the railing, one hand pressed flat against the back of his neck, the way he had done since he was a boy when something had gone wrong that he did not know how to fix. Quentin Marsh and I sat at the dining table with the documents between us. I looked at the papers with the unfocused attention of a man trying to read in poor light, picking up one page and setting it down and picking up another. Quentin sat with his hands folded, his briefcase closed on the floor beside his chair, saying nothing. He had the patience of a professional. He had done this kind of waiting in many different rooms. After 8 minutes, Travis came back inside. He was sweating. It was 31 degrees on the other side of that door, and he had been out there in his suit jacket, and he came back into the warm cabin sweating, which told me everything I needed to know about the nature of the phone call before he said a word. Brenda read it too. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at him once and said, very quietly, "How bad?" "A 3,000,008, he said. "The Denver deal is in default. They froze the operating accounts this morning. The note comes due in 30 days. Brenda's expression did not change, but her eyes went to the documents still spread on the dining table, and then to me, and then back to Travis, and something in the geometry of that triangle told me that the timeline had just changed in a way that made Tuesday's careful plan feel like a luxury neither of them could afford. Travis said he needed a moment. He and Brenda moved into the hallway. I could hear the cadence of their voices low, urgent, the rhythm of two people working through arithmetic that is not adding up. I sat at the table and looked at the unsigned documents and thought about nothing in particular. The birdhouse on the dining room shelf recorded everything. Brenda came back into the dining room first. Her face had reset into its working expression, managed, purposeful, moving toward a solution she had already identified. "We need to accelerate," she said to Travis, who had followed her back in. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but barely above a whisper was well within the microphone's range. "Tonight, we do not wait for the documentation to be perfect. We do not wait for the notary's schedule. We get a signature tonight." Travis looked at the documents, then at me, sitting at the table with the expression of a man who has misplaced the thread of a conversation. "Brenda," he said, "what you are describing is a forged signature. That is a felony. Prison is a possibility," she said. "Bankruptcy is a certainty. Those are your two options. Choose one." The room was very quiet after that. Quentin Marsh, who had been standing near the hallway entrance with his briefcase in hand, cleared his throat. "I think perhaps we should reschedule for next week," he said. "Give everyone a chance to—" "You are staying," Travis said. He did not look at Quentin when he said it. "We will need you here tonight." Quentin said nothing further. He set his briefcase back down beside the door. I excused myself from the table and went to the workshop. I did not have a reason I could give them for going to the workshop. I told them I wanted to check on a piece that had been drying on the bench. Travis nodded without really hearing me. Brenda was already on her phone, moving toward the kitchen. I had been in the workshop for perhaps 10 minutes, standing at the bench with both hands flat on the maple surface and my eyes on the middle distance, when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. The workshop door opened. Mason stood in the frame, hands in the pockets of his hooded sweatshirt, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. There was no performance in it, no coached warmth, just a 10-year-old using a word because it was the right one, testing how it felt in his mouth in the presence of the actual person. "Hey, buddy," I said. He came inside and looked around the workshop the way he had looked around the cabin taking inventory, noting what was here, what it meant, how it fit together. His eyes moved over the tools on the wall, the lumber stacked on the shelves, the half-finished drawer on the bench in front of me. "Did you make wooden trains?" he asked. I kept my hands flat on the bench. "What makes you ask that?" "I have some," he said. 3 of them. A red one and a black one and a little one that fits inside the red one. Daddy says they came from a toy store. But I looked at the bottom of the black one once and there was writing carved in it. Too small to read without a magnifying glass. He paused. I used my mom's reading glasses. It said November 2015. The workshop was completely still. They are really pretty, Mason said. I just wondered if maybe you made them, because of the workshop and everything. I looked at my grandson for a long moment. I thought about a red locomotive and a black locomotive and a small one nested inside, and a workbench in this same room in the autumn of 2015, and Caroline reading in the chair by the wood stove, and 11 years of distance between that night and this one. What wooden trains, buddy? I said carefully. Tell me more about them. He told me, and I listened. And I filed every word away in the same place I had been filing things for 13 years. That night I knew exactly what kind of men desperate people become. And in 48 hours, Travis would sit down at my kitchen table with a Mont Blanc pen and forge my signature on a power of attorney document. He thought no one was watching. He was wrong by a factor of 8. There is a particular sound a Mont Blanc pen makes on legal paper at 2 in the morning. It is the sound of a man signing away his soul, one careful stroke at a time. I heard it through 8 cameras, and I have never forgotten it. I had not gone to sleep. I lay on top of the bed covers with the monitor propped against the spare pillow and the volume set low enough that I would hear the hallway without it carrying through the walls. I had been lying this way since 11 o'clock. At 2:27, the dining room feed moved. Travis came in from the hallway carrying his briefcase, which told me he had not unpacked it fully after Quentin left, which told me he had been planning this since before dinner. He set the briefcase on the table without turning on the overhead light. The under-cabinet lights above the kitchen counter were on, which threw enough light into the dining room for the infrared camera to render the scene in the particular sharp-edged clarity of night vision footage everything real. Nothing soft. He opened the briefcase and took out the documents Quentin had left behind. 3 sets. He arranged them on the table in sequence, signature pages face up, yellow tabs marking each line. Then he reached back into the briefcase and took out an envelope. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with 2 lines of handwriting on it. My handwriting. My signature, copied from the bottom of an old company check that I had written to a lumber supplier in the spring of 2019. He set the sample beside the first document and looked at it for a moment. Then he took the Mont Blanc pen from his jacket pocket, the same pen he had brought to the table on Tuesday. The same one Quentin had slid toward me, and he began to practice on the back of the envelope. 10 attempts. I watched him make 10 attempts at my signature, adjusting the pressure and the angle and the terminal stroke, until the version in his hand began to approximate the version on the sample page. He worked with the focused patience of a man who understands that the quality of what he is doing matters enormously and cannot be rushed. Brenda came in on the 4th attempt. She was carrying a small LED flashlight, which she trained on the signature sample while Travis worked, so that he could compare the 2 versions without moving between light sources. They did not speak. The only sound in the dining room was the pen on paper. And then, when he was satisfied, the pen on the legal pages, he signed the power of attorney first, then the trust modification, then the voluntary commitment petition, which required initials in 2 places, as well as a full signature at the bottom. The infrared camera above the dining room doorway recorded every stroke, every angle of his wrist, every comparison glance at the sample page, every movement of Brenda's flashlight. Time-stamped, continuous. Backed up to Diana's servers in real time, Brenda said, very quietly. 10 years. That is what this carries if someone finds out. Travis capped the pen. No one finds out. By the time his attorney gets to the filing, He will be in a facility. The assets will be in transfer, and the mineral rights will be under a new corporate structure. By the time anyone with standing to contest this has standing to contest it, there will be nothing left to contest. He sounded certain. He sounded the way people sound when they have been telling themselves something for long enough that the repetition has replaced the reasoning. Brenda looked at the signed documents for a moment. Then she picked up the flashlight, and they went back to their room. I sat on the bed with the monitor in my hands and watched the dining room feed for a long time after they left. The documents were still on the table. The pen was in his pocket. The sample signature was back in the envelope. The wood remembers. So does the tape. The next morning, Travis found me in the kitchen at 7:30 and told me, in a voice calibrated to sound gently regretful, that I had come downstairs during the night and signed some paperwork and that I did not seem to remember having done so. He said Brenda had witnessed it. He said the forms were now complete and there was nothing to worry about. I nodded slowly. I said I must have been more tired than I realized. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me I had done the right thing. I drove to Denver that afternoon. Diana watched the footage in her conference room with the tablet propped on the table between us. 11 minutes of infrared video. She watched it once without speaking, and I watched her watch it. Her expression did not change, but at the 3-minute mark, her right hand, which had been resting open on the table, closed around her pen. When it finished, she set the tablet down and looked at me. This is not a civil matter anymore, she said. Forgery of a legal document, conspiracy, elder financial abuse. Those are felonies, multiple felonies. She paused. I am also going to tell you that this morning I received a notification from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Travis attempted to file the power of attorney with your bank 2 days ago, before he even had the signed version. The bank flagged it as a discrepancy and reported it to the State Financial Crimes Division. There is already an active investigation. She opened her folder and slid a document across the table. Official letterhead. Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Unit. Christmas dinner, she said, is in 6 days. I called Lila from the parking garage before I started the truck. She answered on the second ring. It is time, I told her. She said one word. Ready? My son did not know it yet, but he was no longer fighting for an inheritance. He was fighting to stay out of a federal prison cell, and Christmas dinner was 6 days away. A man's truth, told to 50 witnesses, becomes a kind of justice no court can fully undo. The Aspen Mountain Club occupied the second floor of a stone and timber building near the base of the mountain, with floor-to-ceiling windows on the west wall that looked out toward the ski runs and, beyond them, the San Juan Peaks. In the summer, the view was green and distant. On Christmas Eve, with fresh snow on everything and the last light going out of the sky, it looked like the inside of something ancient and deliberate, a room that had been waiting a long time to be used for the right purpose. I had been a member for 19 years. Caroline and I had eaten dinner here on our anniversary twice, in 2006 and again in 2011, at a corner table near the fireplace. I knew the room. I knew how sound moved through it, where it gathered and where it dissipated, which walls carried and which ones absorbed. I had given this information to Diana 3 weeks earlier. The guests began arriving at 6:20. They came in from the parking lot in wool coats and fur-trimmed jackets, shaking snow from their shoulders, exchanging the greetings of people who see each other at intervals long enough to make each encounter feel significant. Ranchers who ran operations in the valley. doctors from the Aspen Valley Hospital, two retired attorneys, a woman who had built a software company in the 90s and spent the subsequent decades redistributing the proceeds thoughtfully. People who had known me in various capacities over the course of 20 years on this mountain. Brenda stood at the entrance and greeted each of them. She was very good at it. I want to give her that. She had the particular gift of making each person feel specifically welcomed rather than generically received. And she deployed it that evening with the commitment of a professional giving the performance of her life. It means so much to have everyone here, she told Margaret Whitaker, who had known me since 2002 and whose foundation had funded 3 school libraries in Pitkin County. Stanley has had such a difficult year. The memory issues have been hard on all of us, but family comes first. That is what he always taught us. Margaret looked over Brenda's shoulder at me, and I gave her the slightly unfocused smile of a man who is present but not entirely anchored. She returned it with the warmth of a woman who believes she is looking at someone diminished, which was exactly what I needed her to believe for the next 2 hours. Travis was near the bar with Quentin Marsh. They were not standing together. They had the instinct, at least, to avoid the appearance of coordination, but they were close enough that I could see them calibrating against each other's body language the way 2 people do when they are running a play. They have rehearsed. I allowed Brenda to guide me to my seat at the head of the table. I moved slowly, with the careful footwork of an older man who is conscious of the floor. I accepted the chair she pulled out for me. I looked around the table with the mildly disoriented expression of a man who is glad to be somewhere without being entirely sure why. Mason was seated to my right. He was wearing a button-down shirt and had combed his hair in a way that suggested recent instruction. And he looked at me when I sat down with the direct attention of a child who has been thinking about something and has not yet decided whether to say it. Lila was at the far end of the table. She wore a dark green dress and her hair was down, and she sat with her hands in her lap and her composition notebook in her bag beneath the chair, and her eyes moving in the slow, systematic way they always moved, reading the room, cataloging, remembering, along the west wall, near the bar. A man I knew to be Samuel Redhawk sat in civilian clothes at a small corner table with a glass of water and a leather ledger on the table beside him. He looked like a man waiting for someone who was slightly late. He did not look at me. At a table near the center of the room, seated between a retired orthopedic surgeon and his wife. Diana Reyes Calloway wore a charcoal blazer and an expression of polite interest in whatever the surgeon was saying. She did not look at me either. Near the entrance, in a dark sport coat that was too well fitted for someone who wore it only occasionally, a Colorado Bureau of Investigation officer named Briggs had arrived at 6:15 and ordered a sparkling water and had not moved from his post near the coat room. The first course was served at 6:45, a winter green salad with candied pecans and a champagne vinaigrette. The conversation at our end of the table was the kind that happens when people have enough in common to talk easily, but not enough at stake to say anything true. Brenda performed through all of it, attentive daughter-in-law, devoted family, the quiet heroism of a woman managing a difficult situation with grace. She was very good. She had been very good for the entire 6 weeks since the Range Rover came up the mountain. The second course arrived, a butternut squash bisque with crème fraîche. The room had settled into the comfortable noise of a winter dinner among people who were warm and fed and know where they needed to be. Then Travis picked up the silver-handled knife beside his plate, Caroline's knife, the one I had given her on our anniversary in 1998, the one Brenda had placed at his setting from our cabin's silverware drawer, and tapped it twice against the rim of his wineglass. The room went quiet. The trap door opened. But not for the prey, he thought. 3 words, 2 syllables each, and a 14-year-old who had been waiting 3 years to walk into that ballroom. Travis stood with his wine glass in one hand and the silver knife in the other, and the room settled into the attention that dinner guests give a man who has tapped for quiet and clearly intends to use it. "Before dessert," he said, "I want to address something that I think everyone here already understands, at least a little." He paused the way people pause when they want to appear reluctant to say something they have been rehearsing for weeks. Dad has had a difficult year. Nothing serious, just the normal challenges that come with age. Some confusion, some difficulty managing the details of his affairs. "We have been here to help as much as we can," several guests nodded. The sympathy of people who have watched their own parents decline and recognized the shape of the story being told. Travis reached into the leather folder beside his plate and produced the documents. 2 sets, paper-clipped, signature tabs showing yellow at the edges. He slid them down the table toward me. "These are simple protective documents," he said. "Power of attorney, so we can help manage things when he is not feeling clear. Just routine. The kind of thing responsible families handle." He looked at me with an expression that had been calibrated to register as gentle love. "Just a signature, Dad. Everyone here knows it is for your own good." Quentin Marsh, seated 3 chairs down, rose smoothly and moved to my side. He leaned down and explained the documents in the rapid, reassuring voice of a man who has done this many times, the legal terms blurring together. The overall message being that this was simple, standard, nothing to worry about, just a formality. I picked up the pen. I let my hand tremble around it. I looked at the documents with the expression of a man trying to read a map in a moving vehicle. I brought the pen close to the first signature line. Then I set it down. "Shouldn't I read these first?" I said. "I do not want to sign wrong things." Travis's jaw moved once. Then he leaned forward, and his hand came to rest on my shoulder, and he brought his face close to my ear. He was smiling for the room. The hidden microphone in my jacket button was 3 inches from his mouth. "Sign it now," he said, very quietly. "Or I make one phone call and you are in a psychiatric hold by midnight. I have the physician's letter in my jacket. 72 hours minimum. Maybe longer, depending on what they find." His hand tightened slightly on my shoulder. "You do not want to spend Christmas in that facility, Dad. Sign the papers." I sat with his hand on my shoulder and his breath near my ear, and 50 people watching what looked like a son offering gentle encouragement to a confused old man. I was not confused. I was waiting for the right moment, and the moment had arrived. I sat up straight. I looked down the length of the table to where Lila was seated in her dark green dress with her hands in her lap and her eyes already on me. Because she had been watching me the entire evening, and she had seen Travis lean in, and she knew. I said 2 words, clearly, in a voice that carried to both ends of the table without effort. "Lila, please." The ballroom turned. 50 heads moved toward the far end of the table, toward a 14-year-old girl in a dark green dress who was already rising from her chair with the composed deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this moment privately for months. Brenda said, "What?" and stopped. Lila walked to the kitchen door. She pushed it open. She reappeared a moment later, pushing a low wooden wagon, handmade, pine frame, 4 wheels that turned freely on steel axles, the kind of thing a man builds when he wants something to last. The wagon was filled to the top with wooden toys, 156 of them, stacked and arranged as carefully as I had originally packed them. Each one with its paper tag tied through a drilled hole with a length of cotton twine. She pushed the wagon to the center of the ballroom and stopped. The room was completely silent. The fire in the hearth made the only sound. Lila looked at the guests along both sides of the table. Then she looked at her father. Her voice, when she spoke, was level and clear and carried the particular authority of a person who has been keeping a record for a very long time and has finally found the right room in which to read it. "My grandfather made each of these for me and my brother," she said. "Every birthday, every Christmas, for 13 years. My father returned every single one and told us they had never been sent." She paused for exactly one beat. "He told us our grandfather did not love us. He said he had walked away and never looked back. He said the silence was Grandpa's choice." Another pause. "He lied. For 13 years. He lied." Margaret Whittaker set her wineglass down on the table. At the far end of the room, someone's chair scraped back. Mason was standing. He was 10 years old, and he had been listening to every word. And I watched the understanding move across his face, the way understanding moves across a child's face when something they have been told stops matching something they have always felt, not loudly, not all at once, but completely, like a structure finding its true level. He reached forward and picked up the wooden train nearest to him. The red locomotive. The one I had made in the autumn of 2015 in this same workshop, with Caroline reading in the chair behind me. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. Then he came. He crossed the length of the ballroom at a run, and when he reached my chair, he wrapped both arms around my neck and pressed his face against my shoulder. And what he said, over and over into the fabric of my jacket, was the truest thing said in that room all evening. "You're the train, Grandpa. You're the train, Grandpa. You're the train, Grandpa." Travis was standing with his hand still extended toward the empty chair where I had been sitting. Brenda had set her fork down on the tablecloth instead of the plate, which told me her hands were not working correctly. My grandson had just said my name in the right way for the first time in his life. And what came next would take my son's carefully constructed world apart in front of 50 witnesses. There was no stopping it now. There never had been. Really. Not from the moment Lila pushed that wagon through the kitchen door. They walked in one at a time, each one carrying the weight of 13 years, each one delivering it back to the man who had built that weight, in front of the people he had spent weeks assembling as witnesses to my supposed decline. He had wanted witnesses. He got them. Sam Redhawk rose from the corner table near the bar. He did not hurry. He picked up the leather ledger, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has been waiting for a moment and is not going to waste it by rushing. He stopped beside the wagon of wooden toys and faced the table. "My name is Samuel Redhawk," he said. His voice was the kind that does not require a room to go quiet because it already commands one. "I have known Frank Sullivan for 34 years. For the past 11 months, I have served, under formal legal agreement, as a documented witness to the circumstances of his family situation." He opened the ledger. "I have here the official postal records, obtained from the Aspen Post Office and certified by Postmaster Dolores Crenshaw, documenting 156 packages sent by Frank Sullivan to his grandchildren between 2010 and 2023. Every tracking number, every delivery attempt, every return stamp." He looked up from the ledger. "Every single package was returned to sender. The return markings, certified by postal documentation, are consistent with systematic interception rather than standard refusal. This ledger has been notarized and submitted to the Pitkin County Court clerk as of this morning. He closed the ledger and stepped back. The ballroom door opened. Dr. Howard Petrosky came in carrying his medical briefcase, the kind physicians use for house calls, black leather, brass clasps, worn at the corners from 30 years of use. He set it on the sideboard near the entrance and opened it with the efficiency of a man who knows exactly which document he needs and where it is. "I apologize for the timing," he said to the room. "Frank asked me to deliver this tonight." He held up a bound document on official letterhead. Certified Cognitive Assessment, completed November 28th of this year. Mini Mental State Examination score of 29 out of 30. Executive function rated in the 96th percentile for age 74. No indicators of dementia. No cognitive decline of any kind. Psychiatric certification of full competency to manage personal and financial affairs. He set the document on the sideboard. "If anyone would like to examine the original, it is available," Travis said. "This is," and stopped, because there was nowhere for the sentence to go. Diana Reyes Calloway stood from her seat between the retired surgeon and his wife. She smoothed her jacket and picked up the leather portfolio that had been beneath her chair throughout dinner. I am Diana Reyes Calloway," she said. "I am Frank Sullivan's estate attorney. I have been his attorney of record for 11 months. She set the portfolio on the table in front of her and opened it. "I have here a USB drive containing 11 minutes and 42 seconds of infrared high-definition footage, time-stamped at 2:27 in the morning on November 20th of this year. Recorded on legally installed cameras in the common areas of Frank Sullivan's home, showing Travis Sullivan forging Frank Sullivan's signature on 3 separate legal documents." She looked at Travis directly. These documents were subsequently submitted to Mountain West Bank as authentic, at which point the bank flagged them as fraudulent and reported them to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit. That investigation is currently active. She set the portfolio down. The trust documents protecting Frank Sullivan's grandchildren were filed and sealed with the Pitkin County Court 6 days ago. The assets they contain are beyond the reach of any external claim. The children are protected regardless of what happens next. Travis had not sat down. He was standing with one hand on the back of his chair, and the color in his face had gone through several stages in the past 3 minutes. White, then red, then the particular gray of a man whose body is managing information faster than his mind can process it. "This is fabricated," he said. His voice had lost its dinner party calibration. "This is a coordinated attack on my family. These people have been manipulating my father against us. I want everyone here to understand that what you are seeing, you can be my father," Lila said. She had not moved from where she was standing beside the wagon. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "You can be my father," she said again. "But you cannot be my truth. Not anymore." The ballroom absorbed this the way a room absorbs something that cannot be unsaid completely, with a silence that is not empty, but full. The door opened again. The man in the well-fitted sport coat who had been standing near the coat room all evening crossed the room to where Travis was standing. He produced a document from his interior jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "Travis Sullivan," he said. "I am Special Agent Briggs with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. You have been served. You are required to appear before the Pitkin County Court on January 8th. You should contact legal counsel before that date." Brenda sat down into her chair as though the chair had pulled her. Not dramatically. Simply without the structural support she had been relying on for the past 2 hours. Quentin Marsh was no longer in the room. At some point in the past 90 seconds, he had retrieved his briefcase and his coat and left without a word, which was the most honest thing he had done all evening. Margaret Whittaker was the first guest to stand. She walked the length of the table and stopped beside my chair, where Mason was still holding onto my jacket with both hands, his face pressed against my shoulder. She put her hand on my arm. "Stanley," she said, "I am so sorry. I should have asked more questions years ago." Others followed. Not all of them, but enough. I stood with my grandson's arms around me and my granddaughter's hand in mine, and the snow falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the way it had fallen the night they came up my mountain. But this time, the predators were the ones who could not find their way home. The long quiet that came after that was when the healing began. Justice arrived. Love returned. But healing took the same patient hand as carving a hardwood maple in winter. You cannot rush it. You can only show up every day and do the work. Travis came on the 27th of December, alone. No Brenda. No briefcase. Just a man in a good coat who had aged visibly in 3 days. Which is what happens when the version of yourself you have been maintaining for years finally costs more than you can afford to pay. Diana was there. She set the confession document on the coffee table without preamble. Travis's attorney, a woman from Denver who had driven up that morning, reviewed it in silence for 12 minutes and then nodded once. Travis signed it. The confession admitted to systematic parental alienation over 13 years, falsified claims of abandonment, deliberate blocking of grandparent contact, forgery of legal documents, and attempted financial exploitation. It was specific, and it was permanent, and it was the price of staying out of a federal courtroom. He signed it with a pen he took from his own pocket, not the Mont Blanc. That pen was in Diana's evidence folder, and it would stay there. When it was done, he stood and straightened his jacket. And for a moment I thought he would leave without another word, which would have been the wisest thing he had done in months. But he stopped in the doorway. "You won, Dad," he said. His voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has confused losing with being wronged. "But you will die alone on this mountain." He believed it when he said it. That was the saddest part, that after everything, he still thought winning meant possession, and losing meant isolation, and love was a transaction that settled like an estate. I opened the door for him. He walked out into the December cold. I watched his rental car back down the gravel drive and disappear into the trees, and then I closed the door. Upstairs. I could hear Lila explaining something to Mason about the grain direction of pine versus walnut. The next morning, Diana and I sealed the trust. $26 million. Irrevocable. With Lila and Mason as sole beneficiaries at age 25. 200 acres under a conservation easement that permanently prohibited subsurface mineral extraction. The lithium under this mountain would stay in the mountain, which was where it belonged. Diana signed the final page with the Mont Blanc pen from the evidence folder, because it was the right instrument for the occasion, and because the wood remembers, and so do the people paying attention. On the 30th, I brought Lila into the workshop for her first lesson. I had not planned to do it that day specifically. She had simply appeared at the workshop door in the morning, the way she always appeared at places she intended to be, without announcement. Already ready. I gave her a piece of scrap pine and a number 4 sweep gouge and showed her how to position the tool against the grain and how to read the resistance of the wood and what it meant when the cutting felt easy versus when it felt like argument. She worked for 4 hours without stopping, What she produced at the end of those 4 hours was a small figure, rough in places but structurally sound, a woman's shape. 8 inches tall, with arms that had been carved separately and attached with wooden pegs I had shown her how to turn on the lathe. She looked at it for a long time after she set it down. Then she took a burning tool from the rack and, in letters smaller than I could have managed on my best day, inscribed the base. For Mason, from his sister, so he remembers. Mason came to the workshop that afternoon while Lila was finishing the piece. He sat on the low stool near the wood stove and watched her work, and after a while he asked me the question he had been assembling for 3 days. "Grandpa," he said, "why didn't Daddy want us to know you?" I set down the draw knife I had been using and gave the question the weight it deserved. "Some people," I said, "get frightened by love. Not because love is frightening, but because love asks you to be honest about who you are, and some people are not ready for that. Your father got scared a long time ago. That is not your fault, and it is not mine, and it does not change what you are to me, which is everything I kept building toward for 13 years. Mason thought about this with the seriousness of a 10-year-old who intends to keep thinking about it for a long time. "Okay," he said. And then, "Can I try the lathe?" New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear, the kind of night the Rockies produce when they want to remind you of their scale. I stood on the porch at 11:50 in the evening, watching the mountain hold the last of the year in its long silence. The snow on the peaks caught the moonlight and gave it back in a particular blue that has no name I know of. Caroline would have found a name for it. She was better with that kind of thing than I was. I heard the door open behind me. Mason appeared in the frame, still in his socks, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. "Grandpa," he said, "Lila says come inside. She made hot chocolate. She found a recipe in an old cookbook, the one with the green cover in the back of the pantry shelf. Caroline's cookbook. The one she had used every December for 31 years. I thought about what you make with your hands outlasting what you buy, about what you protect with your dignity outlasting what people try to steal from you, about a 14-year-old who kept records and a 10-year-old who kept wooden trains, and a friend who sat in a post office waiting room for 53 minutes, and a woman in a charcoal blazer who built a fortress out of paper and patience. I do not know if there is a God who arranges these things. I know that I kept reaching for 13 years and was not the one who gave up. I know that what was taken was given back not in the form I had imagined, not on the schedule I had hoped for, but completely, in the way that things return when they were never truly gone. I went inside. Lila was at the stove. Mason was at the counter arranging mugs. The cabin smelled of chocolate and wood smoke, and the particular warmth of a house that has people in it who want to be there. At midnight, the new year came in soft as snowfall. And for the first time in 13 winters, the cabin on the mountain was not quiet. It was home. If this story reached something in you, I would be glad to know it. Leave a comment and tell me, what does love look like when it refuses to stop reaching? I read every reply. And if you know someone who needs to hear that dignity outlasts theft, and that what you build with your hands outlasts what people try to take, share this with them. Subscribe to keep these stories coming. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. If you are still listening, I want to say one more thing before you go. For 13 years, I told myself that love alone would eventually break through the walls Travis had built. That if I just kept sending, kept reaching, kept hoping, the the silence would have to end on its own. Looking back now, I wish I had understood something sooner, that hope is beautiful, but documentation is what actually protects the people you love. If someone is systematically erasing you from your family, do not wait. Do not assume time will fix it. Start your paper trail the day you notice the pattern. Because by the time the lawyer arrives at your door with forged papers, every receipt and every tracking number and every witness you did not gather will be the difference between protecting your grandchildren and watching them disappear. What you build with your hands outlasts what they try to steal with their lies.